practically empty. Well, it wasn't empty, but very few cars and very few people. You? Fancy meeting you here. So today is day 6 of state of emergency in Portugal. The day is really sunny. There's actually a cloud just hiding the sun for a second, but it's a pretty sunny day. And once again I woke up to the noise of workers preparing for the work in the building site, which is just across my lane, and they're at lunch now, so it's a bit more quiet. It's actually a good time for me to tape these videos because it's not as noisy. It can get a little bit noisy. I expect today they will be making more of the attic window, which will be pointing directly at one of my windows. So it's kind of interesting to see men outside my window, even though I live on the first floor here in Lisbon. It's kind of nice as well to see a bit of movement. I'm not as alone as maybe some people are who see no one on the street. So before I used to have a view of Hotel Mundial, and now I don't really. I can see a little bit of it, but it doesn't actually matter because Hotel Mundial wasn't a beautiful building to look at anyway. And the part that I like about Hotel Mundial is the little bar. It's the rooftop bar they have. You can see a palm tree at the top there. That's where it's beautiful view from up there. But it's also, in normal times, that's where you see people enjoying themselves. I can see them from my bedroom. There, and in the evening they turn on a flame heater, so there's like a flame in winter, that is, not in summer. There's like a flame issuing from that roof there, which I can see from my bed at night. Yeah, I slept okay. I mean, I do sleep quite well normally, and that's one of the reasons I do make sure I exercise enough. Last night I woke about twice, and the first time it was with a message from a friend in Australia. She lives in Tasmania. Her name is Amanda, and she was very, very worried that I'm here stuck in Lisbon. I thought to myself, even in my half-wake state, that... Hi friends! Welcome to my channel, I'm Isabel. I hope you're enjoying this series of videos I filmed in Lisbon. I am now back in Australia, as you can probably guess. Yes, I made it back home, but not without lots of adventures along the way, including my 2 weeks in hotel quarantine in Melbourne after I got back to Australia, which I also filmed. So be sure to subscribe and come back and watch those videos as I upload them. So take care and see you next time. Yes, I guess I am stuck in Lisbon, but considering that in Australia, and even as we speak, they have not shut down schools, they haven't shut down shopping centres, massage parlours. They're considering doing it soon. But yeah, Tasmania, admittedly, well, it is more or less the same area as Portugal in area size, But admittedly, Portugal has about, I don't know, 10 million people in population size, and Tasmania is about 550,000, I believe. But I was reading in the Courier Mail that Tasmania only has 40 respirators in the whole state. And so that's a bit of a worry. And then the second time I woke up last night was because I was panting. And occasionally I do have that. I think that I actually do snore a little bit. And it might have been a case of sleep apnea. But when I woke up panting, I actually thought about all those people that at the moment are struggling for breath, because we think we might become one of them, or someone we know and love might become one of them. Cheerful thoughts for a Tuesday afternoon, but what can you do in these times? Well, you can keep cheerful. So one way I kept cheerful yesterday was by cracking open a book, the latest book I bought for my Kindle app, which I talked briefly about yesterday. So I did go for a walk a little bit later than usual, so that by the time I walked back home and I dropped into the supermarket, it was almost dark. The supermarket had no lines of people waiting outside, and the aisles were fairly empty. I stocked up on a few items, including onions and more rice. I cook onion. I fry a bit of onion when I cook vegetable rice, which is something I eat quite frequently. In fact, I might eat it today. There's leftover vegetable rice in the fridge, which I need to eat. So I might eat that today. As you see the footage of my walk yesterday through the streets of Lisbon, so I walked across Praça da Figueira, and then I headed towards Rocio, which is the main square in Lisbon. It's very close to here where I am now. And then I turned north up to Restaurador Square, and then I headed further north up Avenida da Liberdade, which was practically empty. Well, it wasn't empty, but very few cars and very few people. And then all the way up to Marquês de Pombal, which is another main square in Lisbon. It's a fairly central square because many fairly important streets radiate from Marquês de Pombal. And then I headed down again. I did manage to do 10,000 steps, which is something that I try to do every day. Even if I don't go out, I will then try to make sure I do them inside here. I step either in my kitchen because it's got a tile floor and there's no risk of annoying the neighbor downstairs, but also just here on the carpet and in my slippers. So anyway, I'll tell you a little bit about Lydia Davis's first chapter. I read some of it last night after dinner. Oh yes, my dinner last night was some pastries that I bought at the supermarket and some fruit. So not a healthy dinner, but a girl has to do what a girl has to do. Well, I don't want to eat myself out of house and home. Even at home, we do sit down for dinner with my family, together, but I will eat very little. That's just the way I like it. Just the way I like it. I read her preface and part of her first chapter, and yeah, I'm loving it because I would love it anyway. I really admire her writing, and also because in the first chapter, titled The Practice of Writing, she discusses how she came to be a writer she is today, and who were the writers that influenced her most. So this is the type of reading I love to do because it's all about writing and writers. And I've always admired Lydia Davis from the moment I first read her. And I very much enjoy everything she writes. As I said yesterday, Lydia Davis writes very eccentric stories, just to my taste. They're eccentric in form because they are often very short, or because they have no plot, or because the narrator pays obsessive attention to something that we would ordinarily not even notice. But for me, it's always so invigorating to read her stories, which are a little bit like prose poems. And she makes it look so easy. But in this first chapter, she says that she didn't always write this way. She always knew that she would become a writer. Her parents were both writers. But she thought that stories had to be like the ones in the books that most people have on their shelves. So stories like D.H. Lawrence, stories by John Cheever, Hemingway, Updike, Flannery O'Connor. If you're a creative writing student or enthusiast, you will have read most of those writers and studied some of them, if not all of them. And so Lydia Davis said that she did come across writers who were more unusual formally and imaginatively, but it didn't occur to her that she could go that road as well, and that she could write non-traditional stories. She goes on to list and describe the work of those writers that she read and admired and was startled by, all this without ever thinking that she too could take a less traditional road. She says, "I seem to think that only Kafka, not I or anyone else, could write such odd things." Anyway, she talks about Samuel Becket and how she was struck by his book Malone Dies, in which the narrator spent a page describing his pencil, and the first plot development was that he had dropped his pencil. And then she mentions Isaac Babel. He impressed her, she says, with his condensation, emotional intensity, and richness of imagery, especially in the Red Cavalry stories. Then she does mention a bit more in detail Franz Kafka. He fascinated her with his very brief parables and paradoxes, some of which were not so much stories, she says, of course, as they were meditations or logical problems. And she actually quotes some of those stories in her essay. And then she goes on to talk a little bit about Grace Paley, a writer I really enjoy myself. Paley, says Lydia Davis, packed every sentence with so much wit, richness of character, and worldly wisdom, and whose explosive lines defied conventional pacing. And she exemplifies the story by Paley, a story called Wants, that you really should read. It's fabulous. She does actually quote an excerpt from that story in her essay. So it's a joy to reread some of these writers that I am familiar with. And then she says, "Yet I was apparently not ready to try the sort of story that she, Grace Paley, was writing. And it took me another decade to see that you could derive the material of a story very largely from your own life, as I suspect that she did," and she means Paley, "as I later did." So what she means is Lydia Davis, she actually writes about her life, and she calls them fiction, if she doesn't call them essays, but you can clearly see they are based on her own life. And then she goes on to talk about Jane Bowles and Clarice Lispector from Brazil, and Regina Ullmann from Switzerland, Thomas Bernhard, Machado de Assis from Brazil, Luis Cernuda, Virgilio Pinheira from Cuba, A.L. Snijdes from Holland, and Peter Bischel from Switzerland. The last two authors I'm not familiar with, so this is the time I could actually explore them. And she says that at the age of about 26, she, Lydia, was jolted into taking a new direction at last after reading Russell Edson's book, The Very Thing That Happens. So then she actually describes Russell Edson's work and how she so admired him, and it struck her once and for all that she could do the same. So Russell Edson is a contemporary American prose poet, and Lydia says Edson is an unusual writer. You could characterize many of his stories as brief, fantastic, and often funny tales of domestic mayhem involving family members, but also sometimes their pots and pans, animals, buildings, parts of buildings, and so forth. And she says, Edson opened a path for me for several reasons. One reason was that not every one of his stories succeeded. Some were merely silly. Some stories were merely silly. She lists the most important lessons she learned from Edson. And she says, I read this book, The Very Thing That Happens, and I began writing paragraphs-long stories. Sometimes just one story on one day, sometimes more. Here's an example of one of her stories. This particular story is called In a House Besieged, and it's one of Lydia's early stories that she's giving as an example of her writing at the time that she realized that she too could write stories that based very strongly in her own life, in her own experience, and B, they didn't have to be stories like traditional stories. Let me read you that particular early story by Lydia Davis, In a House Besieged. This is a story that she exemplifies as being one when she first realized that stories don't have to be long, and they can be about your own life, and they don't even have to look like a story. In a house besieged lived a man and a woman. From where they cowered in the kitchen, the man and woman heard small explosions. The wind, said the woman. Hunters, said the man. The rain, said the woman. The army, said the man. The woman wanted to go home, but she was already home, there in the middle of the country in a house besieged. I guess we're all besieged at the moment. So yes, so that's what I was reading last night. And meanwhile, I still haven't managed to upload my first video onto YouTube. It's still at about 50%, and I'm pretty sure it will cease and desist pretty soon, as it has done before. But I'm inspired by Lydia Davis and the way that she talks about not all stories have to be brilliant. Even that writer that she particularly admired, and as she herself says, set her on a new path of a more experimental fiction, the kind of fiction that she writes today. Russell Edson, sometimes his stories were not very successful. She says they were just a little bit too silly. It set me thinking that we don't need to always strive for greatness. I know that that's a truism, but the thing is, with my video type of adventure that I'm doing now, you know, I'm looking at those videos again, the ones where I'm talking to you like I am now, and when I'm editing them, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, you know, I have so much to learn, how to talk on camera, how to structure engaging content, how to speak clearly and not stumble in my words, how to not repeat myself, how not to go and you know, all those things, how to choose camera angles that don't show my nostrils as much. So there's so much to learn, and I could have postponed my adventure, my YouTube adventure, for later when I'm really good at this, which I am not. I'm learning as I go. I know that for those of you who are looking at these videos, you're probably going, yes, your videos are not fantastic, but I'm not going to stop. I'm going to keep going because I want to basically stay connected, and this is an exercise in connection more than anything else, for my own sake and for the sake of my family who will eventually see these videos if I can ever upload them and send it to them, for my future self, as I said in the first video, and B, it doesn't matter that I make mistakes because there's no such thing as start practicing too soon. The soonest we start practicing, the sooner we get better. So for all of you out there who are about to start your book now, but you have been postponing it because it's just a bit daunting because you don't even know what to do. You've never written anything. Well, the only way to actually do it and to learn about it, the best way, is by doing it. I mean, as a writer, one of the good ways to learn how to write is by reading. But an even better way is to write. I guess that's also something I should talk to myself more about because I don't do enough writing. I always think, oh, I need to prepare my lesson plans. Oh, I need to keep up with the latest writers, therefore I need to read and read and read. Yes, but why not also write? At the moment I'm not doing that much writing, admittedly, because I'm spending an inordinate amount of time editing. But it's wonderful, I'm really enjoying it. As I say, I'm learning so much as I go, and it is a creative outlet, and it is an exercise in composition and structuring and content management, and we all need to practice that as writers, fiction writers and non-fiction writers. So I'll leave you with those thoughts. Keep up failing in your creative pursuits because that's the best way to practice. And I'll see you tomorrow at around the same time. I'll just give the numbers for today now. They haven't been updated yet, but I'll put them on the screen now. The numbers of confirmed cases for Portugal and confirmed deaths. Not the world's most cheerful way to end a video, but I want to keep a record. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.